Virgo, welcome to you. This is your tarot reading for the month of March. And most signs readings for March have been deeply psychological. Is yours? I'm not sure. I'm drawn to the central card, the overall energy. You have dependencies. You have dependents. Could be people that are dependent on you. And sometimes it feels like a bit of a struggle. In the past, you had a very clear sense of direction. Has that gone? For many people it has, and for very understandable reasons because of all that's going on in the world, but you need to ignore them probably. Your current energy is that of working with others, getting the best out of other people and doing it in a very gentle sort of way. But despite it being gentle, the downside could be manipulation by you. I don't know if that applies. Certainly not yet. In the future we have some conflict, but they're often conflicts that are easily resolved. The energy that leads to the outcome very much fits in with that dependence. You feel like you're carrying the burden of the world on your shoulders. I wonder if this is about not thinking about all that's going on in the world, because you can't control it directly, at least. But there's also a feeling that it's nearly at an end. What would change the outcome is you going inside yourself and looking for answers, understanding yourself better, maybe even going through a dark night of the soul. The outcome isn't necessarily a bad outcome, but I think that last card points to the fact that it could be better. And, you have free will, so you could go with that energy. The outcome is the Hanged Man. I suspect this is self-imposed, and I suspect all it's talking about is there's so much going on in the world that you're waiting to see the lie of the land before acting. Whereas I think the overall energy of this reading is that you shouldn't get too concerned with global events, and you should create your own future, and that would come through this introspection of the Hermit. Looks interesting, very interesting, Virgo. So let's look at each card individually. Overall energy is of the Queen of Pentacles, and I always call her the single mother card, and then I always say we're just talking about energies. You don't have to be female, and you don't have to have got children. It's the energy of having things dependent on you, and you find in it something of a struggle. And we do have struggle later on, so I do think you're feeling the burden of the world on your shoulders to a certain degree. But in your case, I can't see anywhere a marriage breakup or something like that. So I think it's more to do with your worrying about global events. And aren't we all? But particularly this month, we're being told, many of us are being told by the universe, release it. Release it. Just submit to the universe, because there are things that are beyond your control. There's no doubt that there's a lot of karmic things going on. So even if you feel you've been wronged, just release it. Allow the universe to deal with it. And I think that's how we should read this. And this runs throughout the entire reading. So it is clearly very important, this energy. It could be that you've had a marriage breakup and have dependent children. But I think it's about you worrying about things in the world, if I'm truthful. I use the word worry, and maybe worry is putting it too strongly. I think it's a concern, let's put it that way. And the concern is the same concern that we all have, and that is a feeling of loss of control. Certainly I myself, during the health crisis, suffered from a massive loss of control. I wasn't allowed to leave the island of Java. I wasn't allowed to go into shopping malls, use public transport, go to government offices. So, I was severely restricted, and it created this massive sense of loss of control over my life. And I think we're all feeling that. Before you knew where you were going, you had a firm sense of direction, and you were moving at a pace. But now all of that seems to have disappeared. And I do think that this reading is about you gaining a sense of control again. But it's by turning your back on global events and looking internally for what you must do yourself. And your current energy, it could be a controlling card. Queen of Wands. I mean, she's a lovely queen. She tends to get the best out of other people by using a sort of a gentle force. I can't help but see that riding crop in her hand, She does do it gently, but you always know that maybe there's something about her that could be somewhat dangerous. Normally she does it in a wonderful way that people just automatically follow her. But is it a bit manipulative? It could be. It could be. I'm not certain that this is the energy that we require at the moment. I don't think this is necessarily a warning. I think it's a reaction to your loss of control and you trying to exert control, but maybe in the wrong way. And maybe staying with this sort of theme that I think is developing in the future, we have the energy of misunderstandings and arguments. Now, this controlling aspect to what I'm talking about, it might be for very good reasons. You might believe that what you're doing is in the best interest of others, but people don't always see it that way. So we've got this sort of conflict arguments energy, but it's probably because you're all trying to do the same thing but not in the same way. And if only you could discuss it, you would maybe resolve this. So it isn't necessarily as bad an energy as it might seem, but I do have this sort of concern throughout this that you're trying to take control of your life by controlling others. That's the feeling I'm getting. And you certainly are shouldering a burden. You feel like you're shouldering the burden of the world on your shoulders. And, I think that's exactly it. That's exactly it. There's reassurance in this energy that it's nearly over. And, I've said we can't control world events. I like give it over to the universe, and karmic justice is coming. As soon as the Epstein case hit the news, I knew there was something fundamental about it. And of course recently we've had the release of the names of the people who were on Little St. James. Now, how much justice is actually going to come, I don't know. but it's a step. It's showing us that there is karmic justice, and it might not even be physical justice. Those names might, things might happen in their lives that are negative as a result of the universe intervening. And I think most of us look at the world now, and probably many of us have a good view of what's wrong. And maybe some of us have a view of how to put it right. But it's a bit like that conflict card, We're not all the same. We don't all agree. And whilst we might all agree that there's something very wrong, our prescriptions on how to put it right are very different. And so I think you're being asked to just release those feelings. Focus on yourself. Focus on yourself, and you can therefore create something better. Now, whilst I'm imploring you to give things up, and that will lead to the outcome, the real evidence I have for that is this Hermit card, because that changes the outcome. So you'd move forward quicker if you sought answers within inside yourself rather than looking externally. Looking in your heart rather than your head for the answers, probably. You maybe need to go through a dark night of the soul, and you need to understand your own fears, which undoubtedly you're projecting onto the world. But when you can understand they're your fears and that they're deeper rooted in things personal to you, I think you're in a much better position to move on. So I am imploring you to do this, probably through meditation. And the outcome, it's not a bad energy, but I think this sort of going inside yourself could make it better. And it's that of the Hanged Man. It's that of waiting around, seeing the lie of the land before you act. And I'm sure you're purposely doing that, as opposed to, you've had to do it. Although, I think you're hanging around to see how world events play out before you decide on what course of action to take, which is no bad thing. But I think you could release yourself even from that if you could go inside yourself and look for answers. So I think there could be so much more than this outcome if you're willing to grab it. And I suppose grab is exactly the wrong word, because it's release it. Release these concerns you have about the world and focus internally on yourself. I've got very strong feelings that my interpretation of this spread is correct. But I'm just going to check it out by getting some clarity on that card of conflict or arguments. And the first card is that of the Knight of Swords, bold, brave, but does sometimes jump to the wrong conclusions. The second card of clarity is that of the Seven of Pentacles, new skills acquisition. And the third card is that of Temperance, seeing the other side and taking the middle ground. So I think I have got it right, but let's look at each. First energy, the Knight of Swords. Bold, brave, fearless, the most fearless of all of the cards, most ferocious in fact. But also somebody that can jump to the wrong conclusions. And I think this is reflecting what I said about we all have views of what's wrong with the world, but we have different views of how to put it right. And you know, if you don't go inside yourself and look at your own fears, then chances are you will jump to the wrong conclusions. So, you know, this card of conflict, during a health crisis, I followed a lot of channels that expressed my concerns about the health crisis. But I sort of don't watch them anymore because of they could be accused of being sea theorists. Well, they were, you know, they started and whilst I agreed with their concerns, they veered off in directions that I didn't think were right. And it's that sort of a thing that I think is going on in this conflict. So I think it's a warning to give it up. Give up your prescriptions. Stop seeking to control. And I think you'll have a better life if you can do that. And I've just mentioned how I used to watch those channels that could be described as sea theorists. I don't like that term because of the reason I watched the channels was I was pretty certain they'd got a lot right. And, you know, it's just a put down by those who want to impose their views upon us. And of course, this whole reading is not about not doing that. But on those channels, they had this thing about awakening or waking up. And I think that's what's happened to you. You've been through this awakening, but you've probably taken it a little too far. You know, the awakening should tell you about what's wrong, but doesn't necessarily tell you the prescription. And I think that's where this conflict comes in. And I'm sure some of you have followed these sea theories and are screaming at me now, Java, you've got it wrong. Look at this, you know. And yeah, I know. I've been down those. I've been down those rabbit holes. And my honest assessment is that it isn't an evil cabal pulling the strings. There might be many evil cabals attempting to pull strings, but that isn't at the root of it. Is we're talking about humanity, we're talking about all of us, and it is that we have allowed a certain form of thinking that I believe arose from the Enlightenment to just go off at such a pace that it's now destroying everything. And all of us need to change our thinking, which is what this reading is all about. And a part of that for you is in recognising that yes, there are people who are greedy, there are people that are manipulative, but just like you trying to impose your view on others, that's often all they're trying to do. You know, greed is good type of thing, that it is right and proper to pursue profit maximisation, etc., etc. And many of us believe that, you know. So it's trying to see their understanding of the world and being a bit more compassionate. Now, I don't see this as defeatism. This is simply explaining why there's conflict. And you're being urged to take more of a middle ground. So I think we can summarise for you, Virgo, and this didn't go at all as I thought. Virgo, I prefixed this reading by saying that March was a deeply psychological month, and I wasn't certain that yours was, but it's incredibly psychological. You're feeling a loss of control, a loss of power, because you know the world has changed. You know the world has changed in very fundamental ways, and I think you've got very firm ideas and what is wrong with the world. And there's no harm in having those because they're probably correct. But where you take it a little bit too far is your prescriptions on how to change for the better and trying to impose your ideas on others. I think you do it in probably quite a kind way, quite a nice way, but it will lead to conflict. And a part of the problem is that you are shouldering the burden of the soul that's wrong with the world on your shoulders. And in this reading, you're really being counselled to release it, to give it up. Allow the universe to deal with the wrongs of the world. And if you can do that, I think you'll have a much better life. I suspect you feel that you've been awoken to these issues. That, suddenly the mask has been lifted and you can see all that's wrong in the world. And therefore you feel this sort of crusade to change it. To a certain degree, I think you're doing it in a very gentle sort of way. I think you're not actually taking real action as much as trying to persuade others that you're right. Because I think you're waiting around to see what transpires before you act. And even when it transpires, how will you act, And the advice you're being given here is to recognise that many of these fears you have are very deep-rooted within your own psychology. And you ought to meditate and explore what these deep-rooted fears are. And I think if you can do that, you'll surprise yourself because you'll realise that you're transposing your darkest fears onto the world. I'm not trying to say there isn't something very, very wrong with the world. I'm not trying to say there aren't greedy, manipulative, controlling people. What I'm trying to say is you are in danger of being a little bit like that yourself, probably for all the best reasons. But if you can understand that, then I think your life will be much better, Virgo.